Richard, how do protesters win against a strategy like that?
I think they win by information, and that's what they're trying to do. They have to counter this story. They have to tell people how it happened, how it really started, who is fighting. They have to remain nonviolent, and the protesters aren't doing a very good job of that. They feel attacked, and they say they have to defend themselves. It is very difficult to win when you are picked into a fight, and then if you're drawn into a fight, to try and maintain your air of being innocent and nonviolent. I don't know exactly how you do that.
Either of you gentlemen, the curfew, as I understand it, ends in an hour and 45 minutes. While you were on last hour with Ed, we heard the call to prayer. There are these these sort of milestones. We see dawn breaking behind you. As these different things happen, how do you expect that to affect the momentum, the continued violence, the chaos that we see still unfolding today? We keep thinking it's winding down, and it's not winding down behind you.
Rachel, this 76-year-old woman we interviewed, stuck in her apartment on the 6th floor across from the museum, said, you know, it seems to me even protesters have to take a break. They have to rest. Richard's right. Part of how whipped up people are, these hand-to-hand fights where one side throws a Molotov cocktail, the other side throws the bottle shards 20 feet back at the opposing group of protesters. It's getting almost goofy and surreal, all of it happening on a highway overpass across from a world-class museum. So I think the light of day, the coming of a new day. Of course, Mubarak still has cards to play. Anything after watching protesters arrive on Camelback today, armed and ready for a fight. Very little will surprise us here. And one more point, Rachel. We woke up this morning to find the internet was back up, and it's been talked about that there's a double edge to that. It was theorized that one of the uses of the internet perhaps was to mobilize all these disparate groups we saw coming together today in this new front, the pro-Mubarak front.
Both sides say more reinforcements are coming, and it's light. They'll have some breakfast, and I think there are going to be a lot more people in this square flashing. It's nighttime for you, but the day is just beginning here, Rachel, and I think it's going to be a very long one for Cairo. It's hard to predict what's going to happen when this fighting kicks off again and gets really big, but I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that it will kick off again.
Richard, let me ask you about the U.S. State Department's action today. The U.S. Embassy, reading their statement, advises U.S. citizens in Egypt that we plan to continue evacuation efforts on Thursday. We're assessing the need to continue flights after that. All remaining U.S. citizens who wish to depart Egypt on a U.S. government flight and who are able to do so should immediately proceed to the airport as soon as possible. Do not wait for a call from the U.S. Embassy. Further delay is not advisable. Is that what you would expect the U.S. State Department to be advising, given the level of violence you are seeing, or does this indicate that they think that something else is ahead that is maybe even worse than what we've got?
Well, we are seeing mob justice, and we were watching it live on this camera. Crowds chasing down cars, stopping cars, ripping people out of them, and beating them up for, well, from our vantage point, for unclear reasons. So if you're caught up in a mob and you are American and people in that protest don't feel that the United States has been with them enough, then I think there is the possibility that as an American there could be a very ugly incident. You don't want to be caught up by a mob and misunderstood, especially when that mob believes your government is not with them.
One of the things that you described earlier, Richard, was the targeting of journalists, targeting of foreign journalists in particular, but anybody with a camera, anybody reporting this story. In this hotel overlooking Tahrir Square on this live shot, considering the other ways that people are trying to cover this, is it safe for you guys to be doing this work in this way there right now?
we're doing the best. I think physically it's safe. We haven't had any problem. I think the government has more issues to worry about than chasing us down. But we will see. They were definitely targeting journalists on the ground, physically looking for us, and we both experienced all that today. But if we are here and we are doing our best to stay safe, I think we have an obligation to do this. And at the end of the day, this is what we do for a living.
Brian, as the U.S. government considers its continuing responses, we are seeing tough words from the State Department. State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley today calling out the what he described as thugs. We don't know who unleashed these thugs on the streets of Cairo. They have been identified as supporters of the government. The president's remarks have been diplomatic, but they've been becoming increasingly stern. To what level can the United States escalate its concern, its intervention, and its action?
Well, as you know, dicey because there are other friends, allies during business hours in this region who are watching this, watching every word uttered by the United States, President, Department of State on down, because they would like to see what happens to a longtime ally of the United States with internal pressure on a multi-term, long-term ruler called by the protesters here a dictator in this country at a time when there seems to be a wave, a movement in this region. King of Jordan says, 36 hours ago, you know what? I think we need a new government, and I hope you all agree with me. I think we could probably use a new prime minister and a nice big course correction. Excuse me. And Richard, you and I were talking yesterday. The government of Kuwait, out of nowhere, gave
citizens $3,000. Yeah. There is a ripple effect across the region. Thank you, Brian. People in this, governments in this region, particularly ones that have been in power a long time, are very, very frightened. Just recently, we've seen Syria back away from cutting food subsidies. We saw Libya doing the same thing. Egypt, although it didn't have much of an impact, held an urgent economic summit to try and work on food prices. The president of Yemen said he won't run again for elections. The government of Tunisia has fallen. This is all just in the last month. This is one of the most tumultuous and politically significant times in the Middle East in a generation, at the very least.
As protesters in other countries watch what's happening tonight in Egypt, when they see the violence that was essentially predicted by President Mubarak before it happened, and then right on cue, it started the next day at daybreak. Is this a warning shot across the Middle East? Is Mubarak, in essence, instructing other leaders who may feel challenged by their protest movements that this is the thing that can stop them, at least, that this is what can change momentum?
And it is frightening, sending a frightening message as well to the people. The people of Tunisia rose up, and it seemed almost painless if you watched it on television. Oh, they got, a little bit of tear gas. They had some casualties, not an overwhelming number. I'm not trying to make light of the Tunisian casualties, but it was a relatively peaceful and quick uprising, and it looks painless. So I think this is the way of sending a message to the Egyptian people that it won't happen so easily here, if at all, which sends that kind of message to other countries. Algeria, for example. Many Algerians are unhappy with their government. The country went through a horrible civil war. 100,000 people died. If they looked at Tunisia, maybe they would think, well, we can do that. But if they look at Egypt and they see that the main square has now been on fire with exchanges of Molotov cocktails, they might back away.
What do you think will make the most difference tomorrow and the day after in terms of whether or not Mubarak leaves or stays?
U.S. pressure and the Army's loyalty. If the Army decides that this is a good idea, that gives it a pretext to come in and clean up the situation once and for all and have a crackdown, or if the Army decides that the almost 83-year-old president has gone a step too far and is sending his country into armed conflict for his own legacy. the Army's calculation on the strategic value of this and the U.S. pressure, I think, and of course what happens here.
And Rachel, one other aspect I was told today by a senior administration official, reminded today that in a circumstance like this, some of the talking is military to military. It's impossible to spend any amount of time at one of our service academies in the United States without eventually seeing the markings of every worldwide army that has any affiliation, any relationship with the United States, and the Army of Egypt and its generals are no exception. Ties among general officers are pretty deep, and it's been reported, no secret here, that among the talks going on between the United States and Egypt is the attempt to keep back-channel conversations going at the Department of Defense, our Pentagon level, and between very, very senior-ranking general officers who've had associations together for years.
One of the things that Americans have learned, Brian, over the past week is just how much aid Egypt gets from the United States, second only to Israel. They have the 10th largest army in the world because, in part, we fund it so well, and they have their tanks are American tanks, their fighter jets are American fighter jets. We've all learned about that. It's been a crash course. We know the military ties are close, but why is U.S. pressure so crucial? Is the U.S. position on this so important to what happens in Egypt just because of that money, or is the influence to be understood as something greater than that?
Money, influence in the region, the history, especially of the relationship between, to pick a number, the last 5 American presidents and Hosni Mubarak, which has before it the history of the U.S. And previous administrations here in Egypt. Anwar Sadat, remember his closeness to American presidents, the role he had just played prior to his assassination here in Cairo on a critical date for the people of this country. So I think there is no other single country that could rise up, make a statement, utter a word about this that would have the gravity, that has had the gravity, as has the United States. There's quibbling over the figure, 1.3 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.8 billion. You're right. You go on the ground, those tanks are of U.S. design. We see U.S. fighter jets overhead sporadically. Russian-made helicopter has been overhead every day of this, but one of the first things you see upon landing, Egyptian Air Force markings on the Lockheed C-130s out at the airport.
NBC Nightly News anchor and managing editor Brian Williams, NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. We are very, very, very grateful for you guys staying up through the dawn with us from Cairo. Stay safe, you guys, and thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Brian Williams and Richard Engel joining us live from Cairo as dawn breaks over just a remarkable scene. One of the things that was evident and incredibly alarming for those of us who are in the news business today was to see the protests and the protesters, and in particular the pro-Mubarak forces, which you can call protesters or not, depending on your perspective. Seeing them turn to target journalists, so that journalists were being put in danger today, not because they were in a dangerous place, not because they were potentially caught in the crossfire, but because they were being targeted by virtue of the fact that they had cameras, that they were reporting this scene. That scene as such a dangerous development, such a dangerous channel of what's happening in Egypt to the rest of the world. That what appeared to be pro-Mubarak forces just went after reporters and cameramen and crews and producers over and over and over again. It is a sobering thing for those of us in this business. It makes us all the more thankful for our colleagues who are there. It tells you that they are doing so at risk to themselves, but also that they're doing it because it's really important. Sometimes it takes somebody trying to kill you for doing your job to make you realize how important that job is.